Most people are familiar with the type of genetic testing that comes back with a pie chart that shows what percentage of your DNA comes from different regions of the planet. And while that type of information can certainly be interesting and a lot of fun, it's not really what I was looking for when I had my DNA tested. What I wanted was actionable information. I was looking for insight into some specific health problems that I'd had growing up, and I wanted to get some highly targeted steps that I could take or tweaks that I could make to my diet, exercise, and lifestyle habits to help me to maximize my health status. And there's a company now that's offering something called genetic optimization reports that promise to do exactly that. And so this week, I got to sit down with an expert in functional genomics who helped to design these reports to show you exactly what they can do. Well, thanks so much for being here, Kashif. I really appreciate it. If you could just start by talking about the difference between functional genomic testing and more of that ancestral DNA testing.
Sure. Well, genetics, the belief was there's 22,000 genes, and if we figure them all out, we're going to solve every health problem because these things, the assumption was they just happened. They just got turned on. And what we started to find was rare genetic conditions, something like sickle cell syndrome, or something that you know it's innate, you're born with it, you have it. We started to identify those genes, but we didn't know what to do about it because the gene is of a variant that you can't affect and change, and this thing, the issue is there. It's quite real. Then it got into ancestry where we could actually identify lineage, right? And that became a sort of infotainment, consumer-friendly type service. And so it blew up and people loved the idea of knowing, which is true. Then it got into like, daytime talk shows, who's the daddy type stuff, right? You know,
Sure.
and and that blew up too. And where genetics failed was the big problems. 90% of the healthcare budget is spent on chronic disease, and it didn't affect any of it. In fact, if you go to the large genetic testing websites, they'll tell you that we work on this condition, but cardiovascular disease is more a lifestyle problem.
Hmm.
And so, what is the lifestyle problem? If we knew that, people wouldn't be getting so much cancer and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's, etc. So, functional genomics is let's park the problem for a second. Let's just identify the main biological pathways of the body. Your detox systems, your hormone systems, your neurochemicals, your metabolism. There's things we already know that are going on, and we already understand that biology. What we don't understand is how we process those systems uniquely and differently.
Mhm.
And if we understood the breaks in those systems, we would then know what lifestyle or environment or nutrition intervention caused the problem or prevents the problem.
Mhm.
So, for example, in a hormone cascade, you make progesterone, then you make testosterone, then you make estrogen. If everybody did that the same, then everybody using a sunscreen with a phthalate in it wouldn't have the same outcome. Some women that make more toxic estrogen, that phthalate that enters their body means more to them, right? So they weren't born with a problem. They had a profile that equaled a gap or hole in their biology. Now they can't tolerate something very specific.
That's
But some,
That's really interesting. So, what you're talking about essentially is unpacking in a very objective way the word predisposition.
yeah, predisposition is, I think, for the most part, not true. Let me give you a simple example. The big one, when I talk to people on genetic testing, the first thing they'll say is, I don't want to know if I'm getting Alzheimer's, right? And then that's a very common belief. I understand the anxiety of knowing alone will cause it, right? And so there's a gene called ApoE, and this is a perfect example to paint the picture between what we thought genetics was and what is now possible functional genomics thinking. So genetics is you have the 3-4 variant of the ApoE gene. Now you have an 8 to 10 times elevated risk of dementia, right? Because when you study people in a disease state, the propensity is, that gene is going to be there. And so it some way drives propensity to this disease. But we still didn't ask why. You weren't born with Alzheimer's. You didn't have it at 20 years old, 25, 30. Why does it happen later in life? Something changed, right? So what does that gene do? Now we have to investigate the biology, the piece that was missing. Not the gene, but also the biology. ApoE instructs the transport of lipids, how you move cholesterol around in your body. And if you have inflammation in your brain, your body is going to deploy cholesterol as a highly beneficial hormone to go fix the inflammation. And once the cholesterol gets to your brain, it meets the toxin that caused the inflammation to begin with and also gets oxidized and damaged. So the cholesterol molecule doesn't look like a cholesterol molecule anymore because it's damaged. Your ApoE genetic pathway, if it's not functioning so well, the 3, 4, 8 to 10 times rich, it's even more so doesn't do a good job. So it doesn't recognize the cholesterol, leaves it there, starts to build up, forms a plaque in your brain that we call amyloid plaque, and it eventually starts to choke at the brain cells, kill them, and cause cognitive decline that you give a name dementia or Alzheimer's. Versus if you had the 3-3 version, which you do a much better job of transporting the lipids, the exact same leaky gut or toxic hormone or pollution or, over exercising and causing oxidative stress that caused the brain inflammation in one person, maybe also caused it in this person, but they responded better with the lipid transport and didn't build the plaque. Or maybe they had better detox pathways and the exact same chemical that one person was breathing that led to the crazy brain inflammation,
Mhm.
this person could tolerate those chemicals and process them and excrete them. So they never got the inflammation to begin with. So the path is the same. Brain gets inflamed, cholesterol gets deployed, sometimes plaque gets developed. The variables, what caused the inflammation, you can tolerate, I can't. Why the plaque? Because you developed the plaque, I don't.
Mhm.
Eventually disease. So
Mhm.
that's where you play the game of what isn't working and
Mhm.
what do I need to remove and what do I need to add, and then Alzheimer's is entirely preventable.
But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating because what you're talking about is removing all the guesswork. But
Yeah,
that line about predisposition is a word that we in the general public have been fed
yeah,
for decades, which is why do I have this? Why do I have this? And it was like this blanket, I don't want to say cop out, but it was like they knew something was going on. They knew that I could have four people living the exact same life and
yeah,
they might not all have the same health outcomes, or they very likely would not have the same health outcomes. And the explanation was always this blanket of predisposition that was put over. Oh, you were predisposed to have heart disease, but that doesn't make sense. Like, why would we adapt over time to develop
yeah,
diseases? But what
yeah,
you're talking about makes perfect sense, which is people respond differently to the outcomes based on their genetic makeup.
yeah. So there is, you could call it a predisposition to bad biological function, bad detoxification, bad hardware. You might have, we can predict, for example, you mentioned heart disease. It usually doesn't happen in the heart. It usually starts in the arteries. So
Mm-hmm.
just the same, inflammation leads to plaque because cholesterol is trying to fix the inflammation. If you look at the artery, here's your artery. The inner lining is called the endothelium, the inside of the tube. We already know genetically what quality you have. So you might be predisposed to bad quality hardware and put two people with different hardware into the same exposure. One gets sick, one doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't predisposed to the disease. The belief is that it's coming. It's in my family, it's coming. This is how I'm going to die. My family dies of diabetes, right? No, your family has either a biological function issue or a hardware issue, and there's something you need to know about your epigenetics, your environment, nutrition, lifestyle, that you should stop doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something else you need to know about your epigenetics that you need to add to fortify that broken biology, and then it's completely optional whether you get the disease or not.
Just unpack for a second for people who aren't familiar with the term epigenetics.
So genetics is here's what version of the gene you have,
Mm-hmm.
right? Epigenetics, so there's the industry belief on what it is, and then there's what I believe is a more functional way to apply it. Epigenetics, scientifically, is the expression of your DNA. So I might tell you you have a gene that makes you make a little bit of extra testosterone, for example, right? And I can also tell you that if you were to eat some fenugreek, that gene actually slows down. It expresses differently temporarily so long as the input is there. So genetic expression is what volume is the gene turned on at based on inputs and how your body's responding. And you
Mm-hmm.
can make those adjustments.
Yeah.
So the understanding is, oh, your genes don't matter because the epigenetics is what matters.
Hmm.
But how do you know what to prioritize in epigenetics? What should those choices be? So we think of it the other way around, is the gene should prescribe to you exactly what your epigenetic habits should be, as opposed to thinking about it as just the expression of your genes. It's how do I cause the expression of my genes? And how do I slow down the overexpression of certain genes? That's a better way to use it as a functional tool. Here's my genes. Here's the ones that work well, ignore them. Here's the ones that don't work well. What can I add as a supplement, a food, an exercise that causes them to express as if they weren't as if they were working well? And
Hmm.
now I don't have to worry about that problem. So reverse engineer it, solve the problem.
So it allows you to kind of like custom tailor which knobs you're
Yeah.
turning up in to specifically compensate for, I don't want to say genetic weaknesses, but what's a better term there? A genetic deficiency?
Yeah, a variation from the norm, right? Because even sometimes a gene that's doing a little too well could be a problem,
Hmm.
right? And that's happening with you, by the way. I can pick on you a little bit, right? Where, yeah, there's there's a gene called TPH that drives the tryptophan response,
Okay.
right? And tryptophan is a precursor into serotonin.
Hmm.
And there's a version of it. There's another phenomenon called epistasis. So genetics says here's what version of a gene you have. Epigenetics says here's your choices and how they affect your genes.
Hmm.
Then there's epistasis, where one gene is so powerful it affects another gene,
Okay.
right? And so that's happening with you, and it's causing two things. Your neurochemical mapping, and we can predict personality to a T. If I have your DNA, I know how you think, how you perceive, what motivates you, what you avoid, all of it, right? And
Well,
so
I'm just going to shut the conversation down, then we can stop.
So your brain is experiencing an epistatic phenomenon where your tryptophan response is to some degree out overpowering your BDNF response. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, this key fertilizer for the brain that allows you to get into what we call neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity is development of the brain, making new neurons. So you do that well. This gene, you have one allele, either mom or dad gave it to you. An allele is a version, right? That causes the gene to shut off to some degree, which means when you experience something new that's sort of impactful, you go into a bit of a shell shock. It takes your brain a little bit longer to create the neurons to process the information. Some people immediately, car accident, I'm calling it Uber, right? They're just on to the next thing. For you, it's like car accident, whoa, whoa, what just happened here, right? And like freeze. Why? There's a bit of a lag time in creating those new neurons. And so for you, things mean more than they do to other people. There's more weight to stuff, right? Whether it's good news, bad news, happy, sad, you walk into something new, this your reaction might be a little bit more than the people around you,
Hmm.
right? The second layer to this is because the tryptophan response is dysregulated to some degree, you're also coming into it with a bit of a negative perspective. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean it as a highly beneficial thing. I mean that you walk into a room and your brain is surveying the environment for what's wrong,
Hmm.
right? It's automatically, whoa, slow down. Or like, whoa, that wasn't supposed to be there. Or this guy's late. He's going to slow everybody down. Like looking for the problem, which is essentially a leadership trait,
Hmm.
right? This is the person who stands in front of the tribe and, pulls everyone forward. Guys, the weather's changing. We got to go back. Not everyone looks for those things. So
Hmm.
your brain is looking for problems, trying to avoid mistakes while giving those things a lot of meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is great leadership. That is
Yeah.
great innovation. That is great creativity. Like it's a great. So in terms of the role you're in, it's awesome, right? For
For
some
clinical
people,
practice, it's amazing because
it's amazing.
that's the job.
That's the job. Find the problems, pay attention to things that people don't see, and give them the value they deserve and do great work. But go put you in like a room full of five people on a committee, it's going to frustrate the crap out of you, right? Because like they don't care, they don't understand, they don't value this thing I'm trying to fix,
Hmm.
right? Because they're not thinking like you. So your brain would strive thrive more in like a leadership role,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where even
It's
yeah,
spot on.
even yeah, and so even a good version of the gene can change the outcome. So it's not about whether it's good or bad, it's whether it's different. And
Sure.
then, no, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. Well, let's jump in more and talk about what my results show. It'll give you an opportunity to pick on me, And it'll give everyone watching an opportunity to really kind of sink their teeth into the differences between the type of testing that's functional genomics versus, hearing that I'm 25% Iberian and 15% Italian and all these other things. So,
So here's a big one, by the way. I remember you saying earlier that when it came to sports and athletics, you struggle with recovery.
yes.
And so here's why. And now this was a good way for someone to understand how you can make decisions that the exercise, why would that ever be a bad thing, right? If you go to a doctor and you have a heart issue, like exercise is one of the things. Go exercise, go run on a treadmill. You running on a treadmill will cause heart disease.
Mm,
It's like completely counterintuitive.
mm,
Why? Your mitochondria are regulated by a gene pathway called superoxide dismutase, SOD2, and yours isn't working so well, which means two things. When you get into oxidative stress, I'm running on a treadmill, taking in more oxygen, and my mitochondria, every one of my cells has mitochondria in it. That's where the oxygen that I breathe gets combined with the nutrition that I just consumed to make energy. My mitochondria is constantly making energy, right? In that process, using the oxygen as fuel, you make something called an oxidant.
mhm.
And the oxidant is a free radical inflammatory toxin. You're meant to remove that from the cell, kick it out into the bloodstream, pee it out, sweat it out, poop it out, detox it, right? You struggle removing it from the cell. The pathway doesn't work so well. So for you, running on a treadmill, more oxidation means prematurely aging the cell, suffocating the cell. The cell struggles to some degree, right? So having said that, that means poor recovery,
Mm.
right? That means that when you go into cardiovascular training, it causes, you to have a lag time. And for you, for let's just say this, no cardiovascular, and also if you're going to train, you're going to spend a day or two in between training sessions recovering as opposed to training back to back.
That's so interesting. So the practical side of this, from my life experience, is
Yeah.
that my father was a distance runner, and he used to wake me up early and make me go running with him. I hate running. I mean, you're talking. I was in elementary school. He would run me before school because I was very active and I would get in trouble a lot in school. And so
Yeah.
he figured like run me so that I don't have any energy left and then I can't make trouble in school. But I hate running. I hate distance activities with
Yeah.
a passion. Like they frustrate me. They don't feel good. And I love anaerobic
Yeah.
exercise. I love it. I'm good at it. And that has been now over 3 decades worth of anaerobic exercise. And this morning I was running sprints on the hill by my house and pulling a sled up the hill. Give me
Yeah.
something anaerobic that is like strength based, I sink my teeth into it. You give me something that's aerobic, it's like torture for me.
Yeah, and so you're wired for it, and you're going to feel it, and you're going to struggle. And if you continue down that path, this is why you see that phenomenon of like Olympic sprinters and soccer players that just collapse of
Mm.
heart failure. And I'm not talking about like pre-recent phenomenons. I'm talking about historically, it's been a very consistent thing
Yeah, yeah.
because they run themselves, they compressed decades of cardiovascular training into a very short window with poor mitochondrial function that they can't recover from. And they'll
Wow.
cause the plaque, they'll cause the inflammation unwittingly because at that age nobody's checking for when those doctors, that training, that food, that lifestyle, nobody's looking for cardiovascular disease,
Hmm.
right? And so and they have it, they cause it because they're not genetically wired for the training they did. Now, if I were to dip into your hormones, which I'll do right now, 1 second, it may speak to why you also enjoyed the weight training to a higher degree, right? Because your different hormone profiles, hormones are three things: reproductive activity or sex hormones, right? They're sort of body type and hair, skin, like physical form. And they're also sort of your tool for training. Like what is your body designed to do physically,
Hmm.
right? And if you do exactly what you're wired for, it feels incredible.
Hmm.
So when I look at your hormones, you make the right amount of testosterone, so right down the middle as it should be. But what you're doing uniquely is you're making a little bit too much estrogen and a little bit too much what we call dihydrotestosterone. And dihydrotestosterone is sort of the manly man version. It's 16 times more potent than regular androgen or regular testosterone. There's a clearance pathway called glucuronidation, which is the primary pathway that removes underutilized DHT because it is inflammatory. It will cause hair loss, it will cause prostate health issues. For women, it will cause ovarian cysts, it can cause all sorts of problems. It's a tool that's meant to be used. A hormone is like an ingredient for a job that you're supposed to do. And for you, you are supposed to, with your DHT, work your muscle till failure.
Mhm.
That's what you're designed to, right? Your body loves putting stress on the muscle until it not just like here's my two sets of this, two sets of that, but keep going until the muscle fails,
Mhm.
right? That's what DHT is for. Picture agriculture, the farmer of way back when who just didn't stop moving.
Mhm.
A little bit of estrogen that you make, a little bit of extra estrogen, I should say. There's a bit of a misconception where the belief is, strength and mass is testosterone. The mass and the guy in the gym that's deadlifting 400 pounds, that's not testosterone, that's estrogen,
Mhm.
right? So testosterone will give you strong, lean muscle fiber. It will give you endurance. DHT will give you ripped, vibrant fiber, right? The striated muscle. Estrogen will give you mass and strength. So you have enough estrogen to give you the mass and strength to actually be able to do the work of the gym. You have a little bit too much DHT and you don't clear it so well, which means your body's either going to get inflammation and prostate issues, or you're going to really enjoy that muscle failure type movement, the anaerobic push my muscle with resistance, and it's going to feel really good because that's exactly what you're designed for. And you're going to respond to it really well. The recomposition, you're going to get the outcome, the ROI on the work,
Yeah. So the
right?
the insight into my life from that is absolutely I love anaerobic exercise, but when I don't train, I feel bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you don't train, you're still making the DHT.
Hmm.
You still have the rocket fuel,
Yeah.
right? And you're designed to be moving all the time. And if you don't, it accumulates and it is really inflammatory.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah.
would head to toe. It's going to cause inflammation. We have a human design. Each one of us is uniquely designed, and your design is to be moving and stressing your muscle. And if you don't, this ingredient is underutilized. It's going to hurt you.
Yeah. 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 Like days of sitting around doing nothing are like awful for me unless I've just beat my body to a pulp with
Yeah,
intense physical activity days before.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where the different interpretation for men and women, because men have a daily hormone cycle. We
Hmm.
go through the same cycle as women every day. And
Hmm.
so the turnaround time and the need to train is more frequent. Women have a 28-day cycle.
Hmm.
So you experience a daily peak of testosterone and DHT, so you need that constant movement, right?
That's
Women, right? So it's different. Women, it goes over the month so that, the ovulation time testosterone will appear, then it crashes. So you don't need it every day ongoing.
So let me ask you this then. What time of the day is the peak? Because my entire life, I pop out of bed early in the morning and I'm fully energized. I don't need coffee. I don't need
Yeah.
anything. I'm like I want to go. Like
Yeah.
the only thing that I could relate it to is like a sled dog. Like I want to get like moving the moment I wake up.
So DHT and testosterone peak between sort of 6 to 8 a.m.
Yeah.
and 4 to 6 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so when you are DHT dominant like you are and you make a lot of it, you're going to be waking up with this vigor, this testosterone that drives a proactive warrior state.
Yeah.
Right? You wake up in that state because that's when it peaks. Now,
Yeah.
some men that are more estrogenized are going to experience somewhat the opposite. They might experience more anxiety, more worrying, more sitting back and thinking versus doing.
Hmm.
Right? The hormones themselves can completely skew how you perceive things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. It's fascinating to sit here and talk with you and have you tell me about me. Yeah, very, very, very interesting. One of the things that I'd love to dive into, I did a little bit of competitive bodybuilding like 25 years ago, and ketosis was all the rage in preparation for a contest. And I'll never forget, Kashif, the first time I went into ketosis and I was peeing on the little sticks to make sure that I was there, I felt like I was in a coma. I mean, it
Yeah.
was it was awful for me. And I know that there's a section in the reports on how I process different nutrients. And I wonder
Yeah.
if there's something in there that might explain that because there's a lot of research out there that talks about ketosis as this heightened state where
Yeah.
you're thinking clearly and you're an endurance machine and all these things. And for me, it was the exact opposite. I felt like complete garbage in ketosis.
So ketosis is a great tool. You have to use your genetics to understand how to use the tool. Some people can do it every day forever. Some people like you need to cycle on and off.
Mm.
And so what's going on is your ability to use fat is okay. What's dragging you down is a gene called TCF7L2 and your insulin response. So what most people like wouldn't associate fat with insulin, but ultimately fat becomes glucose. That's it's a tool that just like starch becomes glucose, carbs become glucose. Same thing with fat, which means it will drive an insulin response. Now you have the worst possible insulin genetics. So yeah. What happens when you get into ketosis is it's not just that you're eating less starch, you're also eating extra fat. There's a lot of fat,
Yeah.
right? And when you're eating extra fat, that means extra glucose, as if you're eating candy.
Hmm.
Quite literally, that's the amount of glucose you end up making. And with your poor insulin response, that would literally put you in a coma, right?
Hmm.
Like that carb crash that people experience. Not on day one. See, with starch, it's immediate. You feel it immediate. If you eat a bowl of pasta, you kind of have a drag. You feel it, you struggle. Fat takes time. And this is why often people don't blame the keto diet because it does feel good in the first few days. It takes you 2, 3 days to get there. Brain is firing, you're burning fat as fuel. Then all of a sudden, your insulin response comes along and says, "Whoa, this is not working," and it wrecks your hormones, wrecks your mood, your energy levels drop. It just doesn't work out. So for you, if you continued down the path of ketosis, you would have ended up diabetic,
Hmm.
quite literally, right?
Yeah.
And you would have been like, "I don't eat sugar. I don't eat the what happened here, right?"
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So I remember having meals of just protein and fat, and looking at it made me nauseous. Like my body was literally like
yeah,
yelling at me, "Don't eat this."
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's another unique phenomenon going on in you where there's some people, so a lot of people have challenges managing food. They know what they're supposed to do, right? But they still don't do it. Now, there's two genes that regulate this, and you're doing so exceptionally well in them that for you, your brain, like food is truly fuel, right?
Hmm.
It's just food is fuel. Give me the energy I need. I don't need the wow factor. That's how your brain works, unless it's truly something you enjoy because your dopamine levels aren't the best, right? So it's sometimes needing that pleasure. So,
So gentle.
yeah. So what's going on with you? There's a gene called FTO that regulates the signal from the gut to the brain to know that you're full. Your brain should be told, I'm done. Stop producing hunger hormones. Stop producing ghrelin. Job has been completed. Don't need to eat anymore, right? There's another gene called MC4R that regulates satiety of the palate. And so you require getting the right sensorial input for your brain to know that you got nutrient variety. So salty, soupy, crunchy, sour, all of it, the more you get, the more the MC4R gene expresses to convince your brain you got what you need. Both of these genes you're doing exceptionally well, right? So your body's ability to get full on time and also your palate's ability to get satisfied. So you don't need to snack, you don't need dessert, right? For you, it's truly like you're robotic around your food. It's just, what do I need? Give me my macros and leave me alone, right? So most people can't do that. And so this again, when you look at that bowl of like you're forcing me to do this, it's even just the thought of overwhelming yourself. But some people start to enjoy the fat and the ribeye, and they're like, "Wow, this is good. I get to eat ribeye 3 times a day," right? So for you, that's how your brain perceives food, and so it would be very much like, "Give me exactly what I need and nothing more," right?
Yeah.
So, and this is where the nuances of somebody dealing with a weight loss issue. Imagine dealing with calories and exercise and hitting a plateau. And all that was going wrong is your FTO gene doesn't work, and you actually don't know when you're full,
Hmm.
right? And you quite literally still feel hungry for an additional 15 minutes.
Hmm.
And this was designed as a survival trait of your ancestors for they were probably consistently in famine or battle. And
Hmm.
so when they got access to calories, they took them in.
Hmm.
But now you have a pantry full of food and you don't need that anymore, right? So
So,
one simple example of somewhere someone could get stuck.
so that's really interesting. So what you're saying is that my ancestors were extremely well fed, and there was always so, but take this example that you just gave of the person who has that different expression. What kind of recommendations would be made via having this information?
So suppose someone did have the bad signal from the gut. So that's a perfect example of now your habits should be formed by what your DNA prescribes, and the problem is gone. So it's not about predisposition. You are an overeater. And that's what genetic reports will tell people. You are an overeater. Good luck. Genetic predisposition, right? You need to incorporate the epigenetics. What is the epigenetics? I know that this gene doesn't work. My brain doesn't know when I'm full. There's a Japanese practice called Hari Hashibu. They practice it in Okinawa. This is one of the reasons they say they live so long. And what that means is eat until you're 80% full. How does somebody with the FTO gene dysregulation know that they're 80% full? They truly actually don't know that they're full, right? So what we tell them to do is this FTO gene, if you take fiber with water 15 minutes before you eat,
Mhm.
and remember the Japanese practice, eat until you're 80% full. The adult stomach is about 2 liters in size. So that means 400 milliliters of water with fiber 15 minutes before you eat, and you start triggering that FTO gene to start activating, thinking that food is coming in.
Mhm.
The fiber and water starts to form a bit of a paste in your gut and occupy that 20% that you want to occupy. Then
Wow.
you can actually eat until you're 80% full and actually feel full because the signal is going to end on time, right?
Interesting. You're like pre-filling the stomach.
Pre-activating the gene, right?
Fascinating.
By feeding it fiber. And the fiber directly mitigates the insulin response, which even more so allows you to not overeat. Now, suppose it's this problem, the NC4R. My palate is always looking for snacks and flavors, etc. So the hack is variety is the signal that you got nutrient density and nutrient variety essentially, right? So you can hack it by here's my intended meal, here's what I know I need to eat. I now know because of this gene, I'm gonna snack, I'm gonna graze the pantry uncontrollably, and I'm not even gonna count those calories.
Mhm.
Because I actually feel the need to do it. I actually think I need more, not because of my stomach, but because of my mouth. So give yourself that. Here's my plate, my steak and potatoes, whatever it is, but I also have a little piece of chocolate, a little piece of cheese, a little piece of a nut, a little piece of what crunchy, soupy, salty. Give yourself that variety to trick your MC4 gene into thinking I got what I needed, right?
Wow.
So think of like a French dessert. It's not ice cream. It's a board with cheese and meat and nuts and dried fruit, right? Because
Mhm.
that actually creates satiety, you
Mhm.
know? And for someone who is really strict when it comes to the calories they're trying to intake, we would tell them, okay, we also know that, all these GLP antagonists that people are using, like Ozempic and, these types of, what do they do? The GLP system is designed to activate when you eat something poisonous. That's what it was for. Like when your caveman ancestors were out there eating a plant that was poison, GLP would activate, shut their hunger off, and then like, oh, I'm not supposed to eat this, right?
Mhm.
And these poisonous foods are typically bitter. So we also can tell people, hey, if your MC4R doesn't work and you don't know when to stop, then have a bitter and drink it. And this is why Italians do this. It's not because they enjoy it, it's because there was a time a couple hundred years ago where there was a lot of poverty there and there
Mhm.
was no food. More than a couple hundred years ago, 400 years ago, where there was a lot of poverty. And so they would drink bitters just to shut their appetite off,
Mhm.
right? It would activate these receptors. So another little hack someone can do, but knowing, do I need this hack or not?
Mhm.
Right? My MC4 might be great. And just like you don't need this.
Mhm.
Right? So of all the things you need to work on, of all the supplements in your drawer, of all the activities, just do what you actually need
Yeah.
and stop wasting time, money, and effort on things that you were already doing well.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. And the insight into my life based on your comment about the insulin sensitivity is I know for a fact that I do really, really well with like short walks after every meal and copious amounts of cinnamon and
Yeah.
the apple cider vinegar shot before a meal.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
makes all the difference, right? All the difference.
But it's
Yeah.
like now it's making sense why those things I feel them on a very big level because it's
Yeah.
something that I'm inherently not good at.
Yeah. The delta value you're coming from is way down here. So
Hmm.
the ROI is huge versus somebody else who's doing great with this gene. It's like, I don't need this stuff. Well, what a waste. Like, oh, this guy heard this podcast. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What else can you bash me on?
So when I look at this, there's an interesting thing going on with you where vitamin D, I would say, is probably the most important nutrient in your body. And in fact, of the 22,000 genes that make up your genome, 2,500 of them, so greater than 10%, require adequate vitamin D to express and do their jobs. So vitamin D turns all these genes on and off so that they're doing what they're supposed to do. So when I look at your vitamin D pathway, there's three steps to vitamin D metabolism. There's a gene called CYP2R1 that will take the D2 from the sun and convert it into the active D3 that you need. Then there's a gene called VDBP that will transport that D3 from the blood to the actual cell where it's needed. Then there's a gene called VDR that will grab the molecule, bring it up into the cell, and now you're actually doing something with it.
Mhm.
And vitamin D is the only micronutrient that has this level of complexity because our ancestors got too much. We're designed to mitigate an overdose, which would cause calcification and plaque, amongst other things. And now we live the flip opposite, where they were outside 95% of the time, we're inside 95% of the time, not getting enough. So your vitamin D genetics, that first step of taking the D2 and converting it to D3, you do the worst possible,
Mhm.
right? So your ability to make it is very low, which means you need a very high dose on a daily basis.
Mhm.
Second step, transporting it to the cell, doing pretty good job. But once it gets to the cell, your receptor doesn't work. So
Mhm.
it's very difficult for you to get it into the cell. So you might go to a doctor and get a vitamin D panel, and they'll tell you your vitamin D levels are great,
Mhm.
but you'll have every symptom of low vitamin D
Huh.
because the blood work is telling you what's in the blood, but
Mhm.
it's not telling you what's in the cell,
Mhm.
which is what actually matters. And so for you, it's very easy to have it in the blood because you're transporting it very efficiently, but it's not getting bound and intracellular, actually starting to cause this gene expression management, which is what it's supposed to do. So for you, high dose, 10,000 IU a day plus even, but you need to split that into two or three.
Mhm.
Because you can bind it rapidly enough and it's a fat soluble vitamin, it'll just end up in your fat as opposed to being utilized. So multiple trickle of vitamin D a day. There's an NHL hockey player that I was working on. We work on a lot of NHL hockey players because I'm in Toronto.
Mhm.
This is kind of like a mecca of NHL training, right? And there was a guy that kept getting fractures. And again, best doctors, best training, best everything. Why was he getting these fractures? And his blood work came out great for vitamin D. And they told him you're just playing too hard. And he had the same genetic profile as you. And all we did was get him to take his vitamin D 3 times a day, and he stopped getting fractures.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, he just couldn't bind it fast enough. So he needed a constant trickle all day. And if you look at his ethnicity, he's half Mexican,
Mhm.
right? Half South American. So
Mhm.
well, not technically South, but he was half from the South, right? And so his ancestry was used to all the sun, and he wasn't getting any now living in an ice rink,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
again, your genes not telling you a propensity or a predisposition. Your genes telling you what biology is broken and therefore what should your habits be,
Yeah.
right? Now, if I keep looking at this, we can look at all the micronutrients. For example, even something as important as retinol, which doesn't get spoken of so much. Vitamin A directly affects your immune system. It affects your eyes and your skin, as people know more commonly. It also is responsible for how you make the respiratory lining, so your pulmonary health, your lungs. And you aren't doing such a good job there either. So what does that mean? Typically, we can rely on beta carotene as a source of vitamin A to do all these jobs I just described, but that beta carotene needs to be converted into retinol, and the conversion you don't do.
Mhm.
So relying on beta carotene from plants or taking a multivitamin with a vitamin A, which is probably beta carotene, not going to do anything for you. You need to eat beef liver, right? You need to eat retinol-rich foods or take a retinol supplement because you're not going to get it from foods. And we've seen people who go from like, I have chronic bronchitis and pneumonia or asthma to I don't have that anymore because I just tweaked one nutrient, which was the building block for my respiratory lining. And now all of a sudden I'm getting what I wasn't getting before. And
Mhm.
the inflammation is gone. And we know the inflammation is the root of everything, right? So, and if I were to tell you how we really think, I've given you examples, right? It's really about identifying why does a specific individual experience inflammation. Second, which hardware in their body isn't designed properly.
Mhm.
That combination equals a disease. If I can tell you exactly what your susceptibilities are for inflammation, like for example, you're not doing any cardiovascular training, that's a source of inflammation. For some people, I'll tell them your gut doesn't work so well. Leaky gut might be your source of inflammation. For some people, they don't do a good job of blocking airborne toxins from entering their body. The glutathione activity just isn't so effective. That may be the source. So prioritizing what is my actual susceptibility? What part of my body genetically isn't wired properly? That combination, I can kind of predict what would cause a disease and what disease I would get. But more importantly, I can now prevent because I can see the reason, the cause, as opposed to just it's in my family.
Super interesting. I think we've got time for one more. Let's go into detoxification. Here's the interesting background on this one. When I was 4 years old, I got a big, you see that scar there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there was a golf ball sized cyst sticking out of my
Ooh,
neck. It was here when I was 4 years old, and it kind of grew down as I got bigger. So my
wow.
parents were terrified. Nobody knew what it was. They took me to see the family doctor, stuck a needle in it, drained it. They tested it. There was nothing, cancerous. Next day, it comes right back.
Wow.
They drained it a second time. It came back again. Finally, it obviously got cut out. That's where that scar came from. That was 42 years ago. What it was a cyst.
Yeah.
But what my parents gathered from it when they left the conventional medical system, because it started coming back, believe it or not, after they cut it out, was they went to see a practitioner who looked at things through a different lens. And he said, let's check if this kid is eating some things that his body doesn't like. And so they
Right.
put me on a really strict elimination diet from the time I was 4 years old. So I was the kid at birthday parties who couldn't have the cake and who couldn't
Right.
have the ice cream. My mom would make homemade ice cream and send it with me. God bless her.
Wow.
So, what it ended up doing, Kashif, is changing the way my entire family ate because they realized that if I ate things that my body couldn't tolerate, it would consider them as poisons and sequester them in a cyst that it would make to get it out of general circulation.
Hmm.
So,
Wow.
that leads me to believe that I've got a problem with detoxification. Also, I learned very early in my 20s that my body does not like it when I drink alcohol.
Hmm. So it's a layered thing. So detox, again, the single gene interpretation is not the way the body works. And this is where also detox gets wrong. It's a bit of a baton pass. So there's a job that happens, the completed job that gets passed to another gene, then it does a little bit more work. Completed job gets done. Some toxins are water soluble or not, so different things have to be done to them. So
Sure.
there's a multitude of jobs happening in a bit of a conveyor belt, and then finally ready to excrete.
So
Right?
similar to the vitamin D example that you just gave.
Yeah, but far more complex.
Okay.
Like if I were to show you the complete map, it's like give you vertigo, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really intense and comprehensive. So where I see the breaks for you is the first step of actually neutralizing and binding and scavenging for the toxins. Your body is doing a really good job, right? So actually locating, trying to remove. The second phase, remember we said you have poor mitochondrial function? That is also directly tied to detoxification because you need enough cellular energy to actually expel the toxins, right? And you would be lacking that for sure. So the cells are struggling to some degree to do extra work. So when there's a toxic burden beyond what humans were designed for, that's overwhelming to your body. You can't tolerate extra. Some people give it to me, I'll keep taking it, right? Your body can't do that. The third layer is there's a system in your body called methylation. And methylation is most commonly known as your anti-inflammatory response in general terms. But what it's actually doing is three things. Converting nutrients. So when you eat a banana, the potassium needs to be turned into something that can actually get into the cell and do its job. So that conversion is called methylation. It's also the conversion of certain non-water soluble toxins. So how do I turn this thing that I don't know how to pee out into something that can be peed out? Right? Third is it manages gene expression. So like we said, your body's constantly responding to whatever's going on. Certain genes have to speed it up or slow down to cope with whatever's new. So you lag in that gene expression, which means when you add a food from your friend's house that your body doesn't know how to process, the genes that are meant to upregulate to go deal with it don't do it quickly enough. right? And so the processes that are required to deal with this new thing, this overwhelming thing, just don't happen on time. And so it's now in the body doing something else like collecting an assist, right? As opposed to being neutralized, removed, and peed out. So really, the solution is very simple. The breaks that you have in methylation are in two locations. And again, methylation is a big map. We can see not just a gene, but the system and which link in the chain doesn't work. And if we just focus on that link and add the nutrient for that link, the entire methylation system gets better. So what's missing for you? When it comes to folate, which I would say after vitamin D that we talked about is probably the second most important nutrient, you don't process it so well. So the folic acid that you would have eaten at your friend's house would have made you sick, right? You can't handle folic acid. The second thing is if I were to add folate in, you also can't process the regular folate, which is what people supplement with. You need something very specific called folinic acid, right? And so folinic acid is a less used form, not so well known, but it's exactly what you need, right? So that would be one thing that you were to add, you would truly feel different. All the genes start expressing, all the neutralizing of all these toxins, you would notice and feel different. The second break is how you deal with cobalamin or B12, which is most B12 that we get comes from food. You swallow it, you absorb it, you get it in your gut. Your ancestry looks like they ate more goat, lamb, sheep type foods as opposed to beef, right? And so you are designed to get B12 under your tongue sublingually. It's a specific form that comes from goat that you get while you're chewing. And that's not what we get from our food today. It's also not what we get from our supplements. So if you were to do two things, folinic acid, sublingual B12. Your methylation, these are the two broken links. The entire cascade gets better, and all of a sudden, systems firing incredible. 2, 3 days later, you're like, wow, I feel different. Brain sharper, less inflammation, less agitated, more responsive positively, meaning I'm not overwhelmed by things as much, can tolerate more. Everything would change. Methylation manages every system in your body,
Wow.
right? Yeah. So the solution is simple. The investigation is complex,
Mhm.
figuring out what's wrong, but now we understand where to go and how to fix problems. We didn't know 5 years ago.
It's awesome. And all of this information can be gleaned from the reports of my
Yeah,
DNA testing through the DNA company. Literally
it's
all
great.
the recommendations that you just made are in those reports.
Yeah, and we've designed. So this is another layer that I personally didn't like, which is the genetic industry was designed by PhDs for PhDs, right? And so the reports, if you were to get a genetic report, it's like, what is this language?
Sure.
But why did it need to be that complicated? Why can't I just make it easy?
Mhm.
And so that's what we did. I made it so that me, as a non-academic with no formal training, I can understand it and I can have this conversation with you because it's layman's terms. And that's what I need. Tell me what's wrong. How do I fix it? And if a report can't do that, the report doesn't work.
Well
Right?
said.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been super awesome and just delving into what those genes actually mean and what you did there at the end with like, this is how you fix the gaps and repair the entire system. I
Yeah.
think that it's information that at some point will be mandatory in order to qualify for any type of managed care.
Yeah. You want to talk about healthcare budgets and people not failing and medical error not being the third leading cause of death in the United States, you know, it's like personalization. Let's stop the trial and error.
Yeah, yeah, get rid of the guesswork and maybe we can just throw the term predisposition out of our collective vocabulary.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kashif. This
Oh,
has been fantastic.
pleasure, man. Good talking to you.
If you'd like to find out more about the genetic optimization reports from the DNA company that can eliminate the guesswork and show you exactly what you need to do in terms of diet, supplementation, exercise, and lifestyle in order to do things like enhance performance, combat aging, and even prevent disease, click the link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen now. I'll also put a link for it in the description down below. Beyond that, I just want to thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button before you head out of here, and I'll see you next time.